So, we were talking about the English Romanticism the other day, and we will continue with the English Romanticism and the grades of it, particularly with reference to Keats and Shelley today, but later on we will also do Byron. Um, and of course, today we will do, there is a correction, Keats and Blake today, and then later on we will continue with Shelley and Byron, although we have been referring to these poets occasionally in various forms, especially during the time we did some exercises. Now, look at what we are going to do today, the English Romanticism. I will talk about that with particular reference to Keats and Blake. But before I move on to that today, I am also going to talk about various poetic forms. So, these should be your key concepts. We will talk about epic with reference to Iliad and Odyssey, because that cannot be, we cannot discuss epics without discussing Iliad and Odyssey, at least some parts of that we have been doing. We have been referring to these epics very often, primarily because of their enormous significance for the competitive exams. Then we will do elegy, we will do ode, sonnets, ballads, and also, did I write here? No, I didn't. So, haiku, poetic forms. Though haiku poetry is not really taught at most Indian universities and colleges, but there is a robust interest in this form also of late. So, perhaps it would do well if we know something about it, at least let us scratch the surface. So, this is basically I am going to talk about today. Please take a very good look at the board. The poetic forms, English Romanticism. So, beginning with ode, which is a formal and ceremonious lyric poem that addresses and celebrates a person or place or thing, or sometimes even an idea. Most of us are familiar with Keats's and Shelley's odes. We also know Coleridge's an ode to dejection. So, that is giving respect or giving reverence to an idea, dejection. Okay, dejection is not all that a bad thing for Coleridge. Remember, for ode, the stanza forms vary. So, we have the so called the Greek or Pindaric ode, which is dedicated to, or which derives its name from the Greek poet Pindar, who lived between 552 to 442 BC. And ode was a public poem, usually set to music that celebrated athletic victories. English odes were written in the Pindaric tradition and included Gray's The Progress of Poesy, a Pindaric ode, and also William Wordsworth's Immortal Intimations of Immortality from Reflections of Early Childhood. Horatian odes is also another kind after the Latin poet Horace. So, Greek Pindar, Horace Latin or Roman, were written in quatrains, 4 lines in a more philosophical and contemplative manner. So, this was followed by the English metaphysical or metaphysics poets, especially Andrew Marvell, who wrote an ode upon Cromwell's return from Ireland. So, see how these things travel. Cromwell, we have talked about Cromwell, we have talked about the metaphysical poets, and now we are talking about how Marvell derived from the Horatian tradition of writing a poet. The odes of the English Romantic poets, and that is what we are doing, they vary in stanza forms. They often address an intense emotion at the onset of a personal crisis. For example, Coleridge's Dejection Ode, okay, or Dejection and Ode, Sometimes they celebrate an object or an idea or an image, and Keats's lovely odes are indication of that. Ode on a Grecian urn, ode to a nightingale, ode to autumn. So, all these are, I cannot stress enough on the significance of Keats and Keats's odes and also other odes of that period. Elegy, one of the most sober, grave, serious way of writing poetry, and it began again as an ancient Greek literary form, poetic form, and is traditionally written in response to the death of a person or group. Okay. Though similar in function, the elegy is distinct from the so-called epitaph or ode and even eulogy. The epitaph is very brief. We have seen "Don't remove my bones," that is Shakespeare, right? The ode is only for praising, celebrating, exalting, and eulogy is most often written in formal prose. So that's the difference. Elegy is serious, it's grave, it also discusses other matters, not just exalting the dead person in whose honor it's being written. The elements of a traditional elegy mirror 3 stages of loss. There is a lament. Lamentation is extremely important. You should know that in the Romantic period, in the Romantic poetry, the nature laments, spring laments, we were doing Shelley's Adonis, which is an elegy for Keats. So, spring is personified lamenting for Keats. So, there is a lament, first stage, when the speaker expresses grief and sorrow, and then praise and admiration of the idealized dead. The dead person is idealized. Okay, it's not just an obituary, but an idealization and comparison with the best and the greatest that have gone before him. And then finally, consolation and solace that, okay, the person may not be there with us anymore, but his ideas live on, or he gives hope or inspiration to the rest of us. Other well-known elegies include Fugue of Death by Paul Celan, written for victims of the Holocaust. And then of course, in America you have the immortal "O Captain, My Captain" by Walt Whitman, written for President Abraham Lincoln. Many modern elegies have been written not out of a sense of personal grief, but rather a broad feeling of loss and metaphysical, more philosophical kind of sadness. Famous example is the mournful series of 10 poems in "Do You Know Elegies" by German poet Rainer Maria Rilke. So, Rilke's elegies are again very famous. You should be familiar with that. Sonnet is another oft referred to poetic form, a 14-line poem. Invariably, sonnet is 14-line with a variable rhyme scheme originating, and this form originated in Italy, brought to England by Sir Thomas Wyatt and Henry Howard, who was the Earl of Surrey in the 16th century Elizabethan period, and also they also lived in the era before the Elizabethan period and Tudor kingdom. They were existing when Henry VIII was there, Elizabeth's father. So, the literary sonnet means a little song. So, the sonnet traditionally reflects upon a single sentiment with a clarification of turn of thought in its concluding lines. There are many different types of sonnets. Most famous is the Petrarchan one, perfected by the Italian poet Petrarch. Divides the 14 lines into 2 sections, an 8-line stanza and a 6-line stanza. Octave, sestet. You can do the rhyming on your own, but 8 and 6. Alright. Milton's When I Consider How My Light is Spent is an example of Petrarchan, and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, Robert Browning's wife, How Do I Love Thee. So, these two poems employ this form. Please look at the poem here, When I Consider How My Light is Spent by John Milton, and look at the rhyming scheme here, A B B A, A B B A, and C D C D or C D E C E D E. It can vary. When I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days in this dark world and wide. Please look at the beautiful poem here. And that one talent which is death to hide lodged with me useless, though my soul more bent, to serve therewith my maker and present my true account, lest he returning shied, doth God exact day labor light denied? I fondly ask, but patience, personification, to prevent that murmur soon replies, God doth not need either man's work or his own gifts. Who best bear his mild yoke, they serve him best. His state is kingly, thousands at its bidding speed, and post to a land and ocean without rest, they also serve who only stand and wait. The Italian sonnet is an English version of the traditional Petrarchan version. The octaves rhyme or rhyme scheme is preserved, but the sestet scheme is C D D C E E. For example, Thomas White's Whoso lists to hunt, I know where is an hind, and John Donne's If poisonous minerals and if that tree. So, these are the examples of Italian sonnet, but the English version of that. White and Surrey developed the English or Shakespearean sonnet, 14 lines into one stanza of 3 quatrains and a concluding couplet. Okay, and this scheme has also been used by more recent poets such as Wilfred Owen's Anthem for Doomed Youth. We have haiku, originated in Japan, consists of 3 lines with the first and last lines having 5 moras and the middle line having 7 moras. Mora is a sound unit, much like a syllable, but not very identical to it. Since the moras do not translate into English, it has been adapted to where syllables are used as moras. Haiku started out as a popular activity during the 9th and 12th century. We are talking about the medieval period in Japan, and they were called Tankadan, T-A-N-K-A. It was a progressive poem where one person would write the first 3 lines with 5-7-5 structure, and the next person would add to it. The chain would continue in this fashion. Some old examples of haiku poems are the first verse of a tanka from the 9th century. So, they continue the tradition which was used in the 9th and 12th century. They continue with that. The first verse was called a hokku, that is H-O-K-K-U, and set the mood for the rest of the verses. Sometimes there were hundreds of verses and authors of the hokku, and they were admired for their skill. In the 19th century, the hokku took on a life of its own and began to be written and read as an individual poem. The word haiku is derived from hokku. There were 4 master haiku poets from Japan. Those of you who are interested in Japanese culture, want to do research, may be aware of that, but those who are not or at a beginner's level, the 4 greats are Matsuo Basho, Kobayashi Isa, Masaoka Shiki, and Yosa Buson. Their work is still the model for traditional haiku as we understand it today. These poets, remember, were like the equivalent of the wandering poets, experiencing life, observing nature, and spent years dedicated to their craft. Here is a slide, please look at it. Poem by Yosa Buson, a haiku master, poet, painter, written in the 18th century. Please look at the poem here. example of a haiku poem. A summer river being crossed, how pleasing with sandals in my hands. Light of the moon moves west, flowers shadows creep eastward. In the moonlight, the color and scent of the wisteria seems far away. Translation may not give you the rhyme meter, but lines in poem in 3 lines. Coming to ballad, a popular narrative song which is generally passed down orally. Even in India we have this tradition in folklore and ballad of kings and queens. In the English tradition, it usually follows a form of rhymed quatrains alternating 4 stress and 3 stress lines. Traditional ballads are anonymous and recount tragic or sometimes even comic or heroic stories with emphasis on a central dramatic event. Works like Barbara Allen, John Henry. Okay. Now, beginning in the Renaissance in the Renaissance period, poets adapted the conventions of the folk ballad for their own original compositions, most predominantly La Belle Dame sans Merci by John Keats. Also Thomas Hardy is another great novelist who was also a poet. During Wind and Rain, and then Edgar Allan Poe's Annabel Lee. So, those are the examples of ballads. Epic, as I was telling you, one of the most difficult, and nowadays I wonder if epics are being written or epic poems are being written or not, but there are great epics and nothing can ever exceed or supersede Iliad and Odyssey. Okay, I stand corrected though. So, Iliad and Odyssey, and I thought it's a good time, a good moment to talk about Iliad and Odyssey at some length, because you need to be familiar with the major ideas, themes, plot devices, and also characters from these epics. To begin with, they were written by Homer, but that is again sort of questionable idea now. It's a problematic idea whether there was a Homer to begin with. The Greeks knew nothing about Homer, and now modern day scholars are questioning the existence, whether there was a person like Homer or not. The scholars maintain that Homer never really lived, but was an invention to explain Iliad and Odyssey after their origin had been forgotten. And it is also felt that these epics are not the work of one poet, but of generations of poets who gradually brought them into their present form by combining earlier poems, adding new material and reworking the whole. But then there are scholars who are not entirely convinced, and traditionally Homer was the author, the writer or the poet, and there are lots of linguistics and literary characteristics of these epics that are always subjected to various tests, and looking at the social customs, cultural objects, references to all these things, and there is always a debate going on. So, there is a question called Homeric question. It has not been solved, and we do not know whether it would be solved in the coming few years or not. However, we need to know that these are two of the greatest epics ever written. They are impersonal in tone. We hardly get to understand anything about the author. The only information we have concerning Homer is given to us by writers who lived centuries after his time. Okay. It is believed that Homer was a poet who lived in one of the cities of Ionia, okay, most probably which is located in Smyrna. So, nobody is quite certain where he lived, some say, or when he lived. Some believe that it was 12th century BC, others believe as late as the 7th century. Herodotus, the first Greek historian, places him in the 9th century. BC. The word Iliad means the tale of Ilos, that is the tale of Troy. But Homer makes no attempt to tell the whole story of Troy in his poem. His theme is the wrath of Achilles, a single event in the 10th year of the siege. That is the most important theme of Iliad. In presenting this theme, Homer takes the details of the war and the life histories of the heroes for granted and plunges into the midst of the most critical episode of the epic, the insult given by Agamemnon to Achilles and the quarrel which arose because of it. But this is also Achilles and the quarrel which arose. This is also the most critical episode in the career of the hero of Iliad, that is Achilles. Years before, we are told Achilles had been offered his choice of two lives. Either he could remain in Greece and live to old age without glory, or he could go to Troy, win renown on the field of battle and die young. Achilles chose to go to the war, and his knowledge of his approaching death makes Agamemnon's insult unbearable. There is a point when Agamemnon takes away his prize of war, the captured girl Briseis, and he takes away the glory for which Achilles has sacrificed the life that he might have led. Now, when Achilles refuses to fight in the battle, the weight of the campaign falls on the other warriors, chieftains, and Homer extends his theme to describing their deeds of valor in the interval between Achilles' defection and the attempt made by Patroclus, Achilles' friend, to save the ships. The Iliad then is the story of the wrath of Achilles told. It is told against the background of the story of the siege of Troy. The two tales support, heighten one another, and the poem is richer in character and incident than it would be if Homer had developed his theme more narrowly. The two chief sources of interest throughout the poem are warfare and debate. Coming to Odyssey, there is hero is Odysseus. He is an ideal man, though closer to he is in no way Achilles. Okay, he doesn't have his Achilles' raging passions or his youth or beauty, but Odysseus is a serious, grave, and a calmer version of hero. Throughout his wanderings, when he is away from his home, his family remains the center of his thought and affection. Though he is he lives with Calypso for 8 years, it is not out of choice. He does so unwillingly, longing to see were it but the smoke rising from his native island. Those are the lines that he utters. He also reveals his feelings for Penelope when he says, when he blesses Nausicaa, another character, while he is away from home, may the god grant you all your heart's desire, a husband and a home and a mind at one with his, may they give a good gift. And he also adds, there is nothing better and nobler than when man and wife are of one heart and mind in a house. The Iliad and the Odyssey are epics describing the exploits of the heroes Achilles in Iliad, Odysseus in Odyssey. But no attempt is made in the poems to tell everything about these heroes. One specific action in their lives is taken as the theme or subject. In the Iliad, the wrath of Achilles and its results; in the Odyssey, the homecoming of Odysseus after the fall of Troy. The Iliad and Odyssey are epics because in each poem the action is serious, dignified and of considerable magnitude, and this is the definition of epic. We are talking about poetic forms. So, nowhere do we get definition of epic more strongly than by reading Iliad and Odyssey. Serious, dignified magnitude, action. It has a definite beginning, equally definite end, and the various events it portrays follows one another in orderly fashion, one leading to the next. So, cause and effect. That is what Aristotle wants us to do in his theory or definition of tragedy. It has an organic unity. Remember, both the Iliad and Odyssey are impersonal and they have an organic unity. There is a theme that runs through it despite digresses. We often believe that Iliad and Odyssey they run parallel. They have the same general characteristics, but a few significant differences also. The material of the Iliad is more centered on warfare and debate. There is a lot of drama. Tragedy is the outcome. Odyssey is more charming. It arises from adventure and social life. It is less passionate than the Iliad, and it also has a sort of happy ending, at least for Odysseus. Because many of Odysseus's adventurers are placed in lands unknown to the Homeric Greeks, magic becomes prominent in their stories. For example, there is an episode of Inno's Vale which supports Odysseus, and the flesh of the cattle of the sun which bellows on the spits. So, those are some of the dazzling plots, dazzling subplots in Odyssey. Much attention is given in Odyssey to social life, therefore, women are important as compared to Iliad. So, there is Nausicaa, and Homer presents a picture of the freedom, security and happiness of a young girl in the age of warlords. And there is a lot of focus on Penelope, Odysseus's wife, where Homer depicts a faithful wife, but a woman of character, intelligence, morals, refinement. In Arete, by discussing the woman Arete, he indicates the high respect paid to women and the large influence they wielded. Take a look at the slide here. Here is a beautiful video from Discovery, Adventures of Odyssey. Please take a look at that. Continuing with the epics, the Homeric poems give us a picture of Greek life. The Greeks are called Achaeans, sometimes they are called Argives and Danants or Danants. The Hellenes are the inhabitants of a small district in Thessaly. So, therefore, the other day when we were talking about Childe Harold's pilgrimage, I referred to what is Hellas, that is Greece, Thessaly part of it. The way the social life is revealed to us, the world is based on agriculture and cattle raising. Athens has no special distinction and Sparta is comparatively insignificant in these epics. The states are ruled by kings, of whom Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae, is the greatest. The kings are military commanders, judges, priests, but they are not absolute. Their power are limited by public opinion. So, we are talking about the early stages of democracy, which is of course, the Greeks paid a lot of importance to the concept of democracy. Here is another slide which I want you to look at from Helen's point of view. Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships, and this is what she says of Hector when he is killed at the hands of Iliad. Please look at the slide and the beautiful imagery, similes, the grand seriousness. Hector, of all my lord's brothers, dearest by far to my spirit, my husband is Alexandros, like an immortal, who brought me here to Troy, and I should have died before I came with him. And here now is the 20th year upon me since I came from the place where I was, forsaking the land of my fathers, In this time I have never heard a harsh saying from you, nor an insult. No, but when another one of my lord's brothers or sisters, a fair robed wife of some brother, would say a harsh word to me in the palace, or my lord's mother, but his father was gentle always, a father indeed, then you would speak and put them off and restrain them by your own gentleness of heart and your gentle words. Therefore I mourn for you in sorrow of heart, and mourn myself also and my ill luck. There was no other in the whole wide Troad who was kind to me and my friend. All others shrank when they saw me. So, we have discussed the major poetic forms, epic of course through Iliad and Odyssey, sonnet, ballad, haiku, ode, elegy. We talked about Pindaric and Horatian odes also, and we talked about some of the modern elegies. From here let us go back to, as I was talking about, the English Romanticism, John Keats. We have been referring to Keats very often in this course, and of course he deserves every attention that is paid to him. 1795 to 1821. Keats was apprenticed to a surgeon, apothecary as they call it, and studied medicine in the London hospitals. When he discovered literature, he read avidly through Spenser's Faerie Queene. And the influence of Spenser's Faerie Queene is evident in most of his poetry. He also was blown away by Chapman's translation of Homer. Soon after passing his medical examinations, he gave up medicine and devoted himself to poetry. His Endymion, one of his earlier ventures, which was published in 1818, was savagely attacked by reviewers, and therefore in Shelley's Adonis there is a reference to the bows and arrows and the hurts that were caused to Keats, and which sort of drove him to his early death. The attacks were, these attacks, it is believed, were largely motivated by Keats's political ideology, because he was friends with the liberal Leigh Hunt. It was believed that these attacks were in bad taste and were quite personal, and the derision of the reviewers drove him to his early death is a part of Keatsian lore, his legend. During the next year, by 1819, nearly all his best poems were written. La Belle Dame sans Merci, most of his sonnets, the great odes to the autumn, ode to Psyche, ode on indolence, ode to a nightingale, ode on a Grecian urn, ode on melancholy. These appeared in his last volume, Lamia, Isabella, and the Eve of Saint Agnes, and other poems. Keats contracted tuberculosis after nursing a brother who died of tuberculosis. So, the disease ran in his family. He decided to take a trip to the warmer climes of Italy, but it failed to save him. He died in Rome, where he is buried in the Protestant cemetery. He composed his own epitaph. Here lies one whose name was writ in water. And of course, we all know Adonis by Shelley, which is a great elegy and a great tribute. The worship of beauty was key to understand Keats's works, that is a recurring theme. His first ambitious work, Endymion, begins with the statement that a thing of beauty is a joy forever. And the Ode on a Grecian Urn closes with the assertion that beauty is truth, truth beauty. Here is La Belle Dame sans Merci, please look at it. Oh, what can ail thee, night at arms, alone and palely loitering? The sedge has withered from the lake, and no birds sing. Oh, what can ail thee, nights at arms, so haggard and so woebegone? The squirrel's granary is full, and the harvest done. I see a lily on thy brow, with anguish moist and fever dew, and on thy cheeks a fading rose, fast withereth too. I met a lady in the meads, full beautiful, a fairish child. Her hair was long, her foot was light, and her eyes were wild. Remember these lines. So, John Keats, a poet for all seasons and an extremely important poet from the point of view of your exams. We will move on to talk about William Blake, who lived between 1757 and 1827, as different from Keats and Shelley as possible, though compared to Keats he is closer to Shelley because he did have some spiritual and political concerns. He is not just a poet but also a painter and engraver. He was a shopkeeper's son, largely self-educated, but his talent was recognized when he was apprenticed to an engraver. The most famous of the engravings by which he earned his living were his book illustrations, especially those for Blair's The Grave, Dante's Divine Comedy, and also the Book of Job from the Bible. Blake's poetry was published in a very unusual manner in literary and art history. He personally manufactured every copy. The verses were not typeset, but were with the engravings that illustrated them cut into copper plates. The pages themselves he illuminated in watercolors. He was little valued by his contemporaries, but now his illustrations have become prized collector's items. The rhapsodies of his later prophetic books are so much a secret language that the poems are still very bewildering, dare I use the word, despite a century of interpretations, commentary and scholarship on them. So, prophetic books, and you should have some familiarity with Blake's prophetic books. His vision was social and political. He believed in man's dignity and natural right to liberty. He famously said, "A tyrant is the worst disease and the cause of all others." The most familiar of Blake's lyrics appeared in Songs of Innocence, that was in 1789, and Songs of Experience, that was in 1794. Please remember the dates and the titles: Songs of Innocence, Songs of Experience. He also wrote poems such as The Lamb and The Little Black Boy, The Tiger, The Chimney Sweeper. Okay, these are all filled with adult wisdom and poetic. The idea of poetic intuition come across very strongly here. All these poems, along with poetical sketches, which was published in 1783, and The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, his magnum opus, which was published in 1790, they reflect the present show Blake at his poetic best. The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, which was published in 1790, is a product of the radical Blake, okay, written and edged between 1790 to 93. It satirizes oppressive authority in church and state. It also satirizes the works of Emanuel Swedenborg, the Swedish philosopher whose ideas were once an inspiration for Blake. So, here is a slide. Please look at an example of Marriage of Heaven and Hell, the 1790s poem, and please take a look at his style. Those who restrain desire do so because theirs is weak enough to be restrained, and the restrainer or reason usurps its place and governs the unwilling. And being restrained, it by degrees becomes passive till it is only the shadow of desire. The history of this is written in Paradise Lost, and the governor or reason is called Messiah, and the original archangel or possessor of the command of the heavenly host is called the devil or Satan, and his children are called sin and death. But in the book of Job, Milton's Messiah is called Satan. For this history has been adopted by both parties. It indeed appeared to reason as if desire was cast out, but the devil's account is that the Messiah fell and formed a heaven of what he stole from the abyss. So, thank you very much. We will continue with more on our poets in our next class.